Hi, everybody. So delighted to be joined by Connor Fowler today. First of all, Connor, how are you?
Good, thank you. It's a lovely British morning for once in a while, but I'm very delighted to be speaking to you.
Good stuff. Always a rare pleasure, that, isn't it? So, first of all, would you just mind explaining to the audience a little bit about what it is you do?
So I'm a brand identity designer. I help businesses and largely online creators at the moment align their brand voice, get internal clarity around that. So do some strategy. We build out creative directions, and then we build visual foundations. So effectively setting the guidelines for the rest of their team, or a future system that they can then scale up. So I'm focused around building the core components of an identity.
Amazing. Very interesting. And we'll come back to some of that in a moment. Obviously, this is first year freelancing. So for those early stage freelancers who are maybe thinking about going freelance or recently have and trying to find their way in the freelance world. So if I can take you back to when you first started, how did you get into freelancing or working for yourself in the first place?
So I've been a freelancer and working for myself for the last 4 years or so. So when I initially wanted to start doing this, it was actually through a series of just bad jobs, really. So I started my work career, shall we say, when I left college. So in the UK, that's at 18. So the end of high school. And I became a screen printer. So I ended up printing T-shirts and band merch and corporate merchandise and uniforms, which was really great for a while until my boss was a massive pain in the butt. So I left that job and ended up working at Lidl for a year, which in the time I was working there part-time, I was able to hone some of my design skills, and I had been doing so since I was like 16 anyway. So I was just practicing and practicing and practicing. And it got to the end of that year and I went through a pretty horrendous breakup, and it kind of shattered everything I'd been working towards for the last 3 years. And so I decided, you know what, F this. I've got some cash in the bank and I'll just go freelance. Now, this is not something that most people do, and I know that for a fact. I just decided I'm sick of all of this. I have some cash. Let's just do what I want to do. So I did.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into it. I kind of went, I hate my job. No one in the design industry is hiring me because I applied to many jobs with the portfolio that I had. And because I knew very little of like the traditional post-university design world, it was either that I didn't have the experience or that I knew that most of my applications were being put in the bin because I ticked no when it said, do you have a degree? So I knew I was at a loss to start with. So I just decided one day, I was like, you know what, I'm going to start the new year doing my own thing.
So really interesting background to how you got into it then. But just on that point there, because this comes up quite a lot actually, do you think not having maybe like the formal education or the degree in some ways can that actually help you be a bit different to everyone else who's getting churned out through the system and look at things slightly differently, would you say? Or
well, I've been to my partner's an illustrator and she went through the university route. So I got to see the graphic design department alongside that. Right. So occasionally I'd go to her events and things like that. And then the graphic design people would be there too. So with the graphic design stuff, it was very clear, obviously, that you had a brief and that's how it worked. And it was your interpretation of that brief. And everyone's portfolio, if you took all the students, you could see how they were very similar, but individually they were quite creative. So I think it depends on who you are as a person and your motivation to put things together, because I know that I would have absolutely detested going to university. On the, not from the networking standpoint, not from the social side, but from the actual formal education side. I think I would have absolutely hated the structure of it. No one I've spoken to who's done a design course, I would think I would have actually enjoyed doing that. So in that regard, yes, potentially it could help differentiate you from the start. But the difficulty and the downside of that is you have to work so much harder to reach the same standard, so to speak, because you don't just get the same stamped process that everyone else goes through.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you first took that decision, then how did you pitch yourself? Like, what were you calling yourself, and what was your own brand, I guess, if you like, at the time?
I was just going with like graphic designer. I was mainly working with like logo design and things like that. But it was just broad spectrum graphic design, even though at the time when I first went freelance, I had absolutely no idea how to do any kind of packaging or even like how print design really worked. It was just like, hey, I can make some cool shapes, buy them, effectively.
Yeah. and tell us a little bit about how you won your first client or project then. Can you recall how that happened?
It was through Facebook, I think, probably, of me just posting things to, you know, all the 500 school people you've added from Facebook for over the years. I think it was a referral through somewhere there. It did not go well. But yeah, I think it was through Facebook.
Right. And what about like the first few clients when you had a bit of momentum? Was it still the same thing through referrals and network, or were you actively marketing yourself? Or anything?
No, very quickly, because I was posting on Instagram consistently for the first year or so, like 2016 through most of 2017. Most of the clients I had came through Instagram, which is why most of my audience, I think, well, I swear I get most of my work still to this day is through my audience on social networks and things. But it was through Instagram, and it was through from the US, which is where most of my clients are from still today. Most of my clients are American.
Oh, very interesting. And is there anything in those early projects you mentioned that perhaps didn't go so well? Like, what did you find challenging about those first few clients that you worked with?
Just that I had no idea what red flags were. I had no idea going into a project what to look for that was bad. And at the time, I hadn't discovered resources like The Future or any other design education. I was literally just winging it. So I didn't really know, other than maybe like Aaron Draplin's process, what to really look for in a client and what was good and what was bad. So I was just trying to charge as much money as I thought was reasonable, which was well below minimum wage for the amount of time I put in. And I had no idea of the value of the things I could do, which just led me to take on awful clients who didn't respect my time, didn't respect the process. And obviously on the flip side of that, I didn't really know how to articulate any of my process or value, which just made the whole thing worse.
Yeah. Do you think, this is an interesting question around, like, do you half feel like you need to maybe go through those experiences, even if you kind of read some of these things about red flags and avoid it? Do you feel like you maybe just have to do it, or what's your take on that?
You're going to run into it at some point. There's going to be something that does slip through the firewall. There always is. But it should only take one or two to make you realize what's going wrong here. And if you're consistently complaining or stressed out or upset about your clients and the people you work with, that's your fault. That's not their fault.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And does there come a point where, because when you're starting out, right, you pick up your first project, 2 or 3, where it feels like it's more real, and this is like, yeah, now I am, you know, Connor Fowler, the graphic designer, the freelancer. When did that, or did it kick in at any point at all?
I'm not too sure it really ever did. I think because it's such a gradual process. You don't really go from charging £100 for a logo to charging 5,000 or 10,000 for a project overnight. It doesn't really work like that. So I don't think there was any point where I was like, this is exactly the moment where things have switched over. But when I started to be able to, well, actually, you know what? I think the point at which I moved out and had my own space and wasn't doing it from my parents' house, that's probably when it switched, if anything, because then you have to sustain yourself and figure it out. There's no fallback at that point.
And then we focus on some of the challenges, of course, which there are many when you start out freelancing. But what was the most rewarding thing, or what did you enjoy most about that first year working for yourself?
Probably the community aspect of it. So being able to meet other designers and see how they work and discover all these other resources through the internet was probably the best thing within that first year, because it helped me grow so much faster. And when I think about the speed of my growth compared to people who had just left university or even were going through university, I was years ahead of them, purely because I actually had the connections and were able to learn from other people's mistakes quickly, rather than being stuck within that rigid system that we mentioned earlier, or fairly rigid system. Allowed me to just pick up the pieces that I needed and run with them, rather than trying to learn about absolutely everything.
Sure. Great, and this might tie in nicely to this next question, actually. So I think it's really great for our audience to see when they're just starting out what obviously you can achieve. So you're 4 years in now, as you said. It sounds like your proposition is very different to that almost generic graphic designer you mentioned at the start. So very focused when you did your introduction there. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are now and what you're sort of focusing on and what projects you're doing?
So I actually tweeted about this yesterday, day before. So you've kind of hit the mark with this one. So I've been thinking about a lot recently of what I actually enjoy, and over the years, what I've been really good at doing. So there have been markers over the last few years where a client has come back to me for a project where I have no skill, no prior knowledge at all. Like I had an identity client come back to me once and ask me about helping them design some jewelry for like pendants because of the symbol work I do. And I was like, I have no idea. I'll give it a smack and we'll see what happens. But I also found as I'm trying new things, doing strategy work, and doing the underlying side of branding and identity work, that is actually considerably more rewarding and fulfilling for me than simply, oh, Connor, we need you to design like an advertising poster for our club night, or I need you to design 16 different business cards, each for one of our employees. Or even, oh, Connor, we need you to help you. We've got this piece of content. It needs to be a social carousel on Instagram in like the next week. So I have no interest in that. I haven't, and it's something that I'm loosely terming like grunt work at the moment. Not to be horrible to people who enjoy doing that, but for me, it feels like grunt work. It feels like you're not valued. It feels like I'm literally just a hamster in a wheel, spinning, trying to make movement happen, trying to make valuable things happen, but it's not actually really affecting the grander system. And I have such a kind of long-term perspective in life in general, and also that I like to look at things from the biggest picture possible and then go from massive to tiny rather than dealing with the mess of noise in between. Like there are so many better, I'm not a 3D designer. I'm not a print designer. I'm not someone who's going to be able to make an incredible marketing campaign across like 16 different billboards. I could do that, but I know that my skill set is in translating what's in somebody's head, in this case, like online creators and content creators and personal brands that I'm working with, translating what's in their head into a visual creative direction and a system that they can use or their team can use, because that's missing. Like you can find an amazing YouTube thumbnail artist, but if they just give you 100 different versions of something every month, like you're wasting time, you're wasting energy, and it's just adding stress to the plate. So yeah, I'm kind of coming in with this approach of I like to de-stress it, simplify it, and make it actionable, which has taken a long time to figure out, because there was a time where I thought, you know what, I just like making logos. I do really just like making logos, but the logo is a focal point of everything else I've just described. Yeah. So that's how I've reached this point. And it's not that I won't dabble in other things. I want to try learning 3D design, but it won't be for clients. It will be for me.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I really, really agree. And just to reinforce the point to the audience, because I get people asking me questions about, I really want to focus specifically on this, and I'm not quite sure what my purpose and where I should be going, is that it's taken you 4 years to get to this realization by the sound.
Well, it's taken me 10 years, because I started out doing general graphic design when I was 16. It's taken me 10 years to get the skill set, and then 4 years of actually doing the profession. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that's the point, isn't it? Just get started. And that's the best way to find out your path. And it's very clearly you've got a direction, which sounds fantastic. Let's touch a little bit on the online creators then, because obviously this is a space that's blowing up, and we're in the world of social media and Twitter. Obviously you've got some great content, which where I first come across you, we'll link to your socials in the description. But how's that working with online creators, and how did that come about? It's considerably more fulfilling than I ever thought it would be, for sure. When you work with the traditional business, there are so many stakeholders, so many people generating ideas, and generally a very corporate structure. Obviously, they're a business. They have things and targets and KPIs and very, very businessy things. And that's not to say that's bad. And that obviously creators and online personal brand types have those as well. But you don't typically get as granular with a corporate client. You don't learn about the actual meaning behind why they started everything they're doing, or the people they really want to help and why. You can pull bits apart, but there's always like a facade. There's always like a corporate skin on top of everything. And when working with creators, so a recent client of mine's Chris Williamson, who runs the Modern Wisdom podcast, it's just a lot more fulfilling and feels a lot more personal. It feels a lot more personal brands. They need to feel personal. So the process is more personal. The approach is deeper, and it usually ends up with something that is clearer in terms of messaging. And for me, the work feels more fulfilling because the outcome is so in line with them as a person or their content, whichever way around that is. So I got started by simply making some content of Chris's. So I took some videos or some podcasts he put together or quotes and just made little visuals for him on Twitter and just shoved a few down his throat, effectively just kind of spamming him over the course of a week. Eventually got him onto a call, and then stuff has gone from there. And it's largely been people finding me through Twitter, like yourself, or through referrals from other clients in the space. And the joy of this is that businesses compete with other businesses, but I am yet to meet a creator who is hyper competitive with another creator, because they all recognize they have their own space and they're all building their own thing. So word of mouth referrals are exceptionally important and seem to be a lot easier to get when you're working with creators, because they recognize that everyone's doing their own thing and everyone has their own audience, and there's going to be overlaps. So when you do something well for someone, they will talk about it to other people, which are mostly their friends doing similar things. So that's an added benefit. But for me personally, it's just it feels far more fulfilling. And it's definitely what I'm leaning into at the moment and saying, let's get rid of this corporate skin and let's really dive in.
Yeah. The thing I maybe add to that as well from my experience is like, and tell me what you think, the fulfilling part, it almost comes in the impact as well, because you can directly see the impact. And I speak to people who are frustrated as employees and thinking about working for themselves. It's like maybe they're a cog in a structure, and the work they do, they never really see the value of that down the line. Whereas I guess when you're working directly with creators, you can literally. So I guess I saw the project with Chris Williamson. I was following on your Twitter as well, and like you can now see your work directly in action and helping him, which must be quite fulfilling, as you say.
Yeah, and you're quite right in that. Obviously, if you're working in a formal structure, like with it inside a business, or even if my client is a corporation. So I've also done a project which is not launched yet, but was for a statewide sporting association. And they were fabulous to work with. Absolutely loved it. They were a non-profit and they were a very large team, but very down to earth. So they didn't feel corporate in any way. But in some times, you're quite right in that if you have a client that is very rigid, maybe it's a product-based business or something like that, or some people I've spoken to who have had, like their work has never surfaced. Like it's just got lost. They've done all this amazing work. The stakeholders and the CEO are absolutely happy, but it took 2 years to go anywhere with it. Like it takes a lot longer to get things through. And when you do it with personal brands and you really build out this process of we build, we iterate, we create, and we publish, like that is how it works. And then you have this weird software cycle, which I've been thinking about a lot as well, which is that with personal brands, because you are so reliant generally on other people's platforms, whether that's Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube, you don't own that space. So that space is continuously updating and upgrading without your consent. They're doing whatever they want to do. Nobody asked for Twitter Spaces. Nobody asked for Twitter Fleets. Nobody asked for Instagram Reels. Nobody asked for YouTube Shorts. They just appear. They are made, someone does a focus group, and they get published. So you have to constantly be aware of this, and it adds excitement to the process, which makes it in turn more fulfilling and more impactful, because when you nail it, it goes everywhere. And that's why I like touching those foundational systems, because I could be a YouTube short designer. But what if YouTube shorts don't exist or they fall off the map in 6 months? You're going to have to change your entire thing. So by coming in at that foundational level, I let the people who are amazing at doing those content pieces do what they do within a set of limitations that I've put together that I know work. So you impact on two levels, because you know you've given clarity to the client and the creator, and you've given a solid toolkit to those today, and an evergreen system that can go like for years. But yeah, from my perspective, if you're building identities and brands for people on the internet or businesses on the internet who use content, you're going to have to update these regularly. So you need to set the foundations correctly to then be able to iterate on top as things change if you need to. So I'm seeing my identity work as like a more of an ongoing thing now rather than a set it and forget it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, I don't want to get too far away from the first year freelancing, but this question does come up and people kind of like to think ahead and plan. I mean, what's your view on, because obviously one route is to go down the agency route, which is what I did after freelancing for a while. Others choose to stay freelancing individually and collaborate with people. I mean, is that a question you've thought about yourself in terms of your future?
So it was originally, so if we're thinking about that first year, the first year, for half of it, I was trying to get a job in an agency. I even got to the stage where I was like, I will have a design job anywhere. But it just didn't pan out. And everyone I spoke to, it was either not a good fit or I was just breaking stuff in my office. Or it just, it didn't go anywhere. And it probably was a mixture of me not having an incredible portfolio. It was a mixture of me not really knowing the language of what to be using to get my CV through there. And also the fact I didn't have a degree, which still to this day is probably the biggest hurdle for people who are younger trying to get jobs in agencies. Like there are some incredible talents out there, but if you're going, unless you get word of mouth referraled in, or you get lucky with someone who's interested and forward thinking, if you try and get a job in a traditional agency world, like I still see people struggle without a degree in any way. That's not to say it doesn't happen, and it's not to diminish that fact, but that's just the experience I've had. So in that first year, I was definitely trying to get that agency job because I didn't know where freelancing would take me. But at this stage, 4 years in, if I ever work in an agency or ever work in-house, you know something's gone wrong. Like unless it's my team and I'm running the show, or it's me and like two other people, or some kind of like flat collective where it's something I own, something's gone wrong. Because at this stage, if I go into an office and someone tells me what to do, I'm going to effing scream at them. Like, yeah, that's where I'm at. So in answer to the question of what should people do, you need to go where your heart's telling you to go. And if you feel that you don't have the discipline to sit down and grind it out, you're probably better off going to an agency where they're going to shove it down your throat and throw you in the deep end. But at least you know there's a safety net there. Yeah, they're not going to throw you in so deep that you could fall apart and have to go back working at Lidl. Like you have a paycheck, you have a stable job, you have an income, you have people who are there to support you and build a team. Like you're part of a community rather than on your own, like you are when you start doing freelance. But for some people, they need that. But for me, I definitely did not. Like if I was in a room and there was like 6 supervisors and a managerial boss, and then it has to go through the company owner as well, I just want to die. Like it would be like I've worked in systems, like just working in a supermarket showed me the flaws of like a 3-tiered 10-person system. You want to then scale that up to creativity? Like, nah, not playing those games. So I personally prefer to work either by myself or with a very select group of people, but I've only found that out by listening to my friends talk about who I am as a person, by hearing the conversations I have with clients and what they liked about working with me, by listening to my own desires rather than simply chasing what everyone else says to chase, and being open to be very upset about things at times, and then also be very happy about the things that are good. Like if you don't have the self-reflection, you'll never figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're very much aligned. A lot of what you were saying there, I'm kind of nodding away and agreeing. And I think the audience will also resonate because obviously they're looking to work for themselves. So final question, Connor, if you were to go back, start again, or if you're speaking to a friend or colleague who's decided to go freelance, are there any sort of 2 or 3 tips you would give them on their early stages of the journey?
So let's break this down in a couple of different ways. So let's say you are working in a job currently and you want to go freelance. My suggestion is always to find as many resources that are educational based on your field online for free and also look at the highest rated things that are paid courses on places like Skillshare or Domestika. Like The Future Is Here, if you're a designer, is an excellent place to start learning and really build on the journey of going from an agency position or just a job position. Let's say you're not even working as a creative, to doing it for yourself. I'd also recommend the book Overlap, which you can read. I think it's called overlapbook.com. It's a book by Sean McCabe or Sean West, and that's free to read online. And it's all about transitioning from a full-time position to running your own practice, which is, whilst it's a book that was too late for me, lots of other people have said it's been really useful for them. Something else I'd recommend is that you probably want 3 to 6 months of savings. I went with a year, like that's just how much cash I had. And also I lived at home at the time, so I had the ability to do that. Cutting any expenses out of your life that you do not need, do that. I wish I'd stopped drinking. Like looking back, like I barely drink at all now, alcohol. And I know that impacted me for sure the first few years, but I was like early 20s, like it's what you do. Exercise and get outside. If you're not working out or doing some kind of exercise for at least 3 to 6 hours a week, you're going to struggle because you need that stress killer. And the best way to get rid of it is not going out drinking with your mates. It's going and throwing a 20 or 30 kilo kettlebell around. Like that works. What else would I recommend? I know I'm going on for a minute here, but there are so many things, John, that I wish I had done. Obviously, hindsight is 2020. What else? What's the final thing? Oh, something else. Learn how to make templates for yourself. Learn what your process is, and then write it down and do it. Because if you can't figure out what your process is, if you're on a call with a client and they're like, well, how do we go about this? What does this look like? And you're going to sit there and go, well, we're going to use this fancy digital framework and I'm going to put these magical concepts. They're just going to walk away. If you turn up to like anyone and say, I'm just going to do something and you're going to pay me for it, no one's going to hire you. You need to be able to give someone concrete information, and you need to believe what you do works. Yeah,
absolutely.
Because if you have no conviction in that, no one's going to hire you, which most artists and designers struggle with. You suck at marketing, you suck at business. Like that is 85+% of people I know who are amazing designers. They cannot communicate like at all what they do. So it's like, I'm not the best designer in the world, but I can sell it. And I know that what I can create is effective. So by putting those two things together, you end up with a powerhouse that allows you to walk into any room, talk to anyone, and clearly, like I'm doing here, explain what you do and why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, all great points, but certainly the last one there, I think I remember replicating so much work in the early stages when I didn't have templates and processes in place. And as you say, it's very hard to articulate that then. And I think the belief point is massive because people will just see through it a mile away, won't they? If you don't truly believe in the process, then and even just speaking to you now, it just comes across so clearly what it is you're doing and the value you can add to your clients. Connor, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. As I say, we'll share all your links in the description. So anyone wants to go ahead and follow Connor and learn more about what he's up to, please check those out. And thanks again for watching, everyone.